Okay, folks, this is Mike Merlin Means of Merlin Public Media, and I wanted to do an introduction to this particular interview. This is a particularly big deal for me, getting all of these folks here together. For 7.5 years, I was the engineer for a series of podcasts for a gentleman named Ace Lundon and all of his co-hosts and cohorts. This was my introduction to podcasting, internet audio, and an introduction to a world that I happily shared with the rest of the world. Ace was a major influence on my life. We went through many things together, as did the rest of these good people. I just wanted you all to know that this, unlike so many of the interviews I've done up till now, is very personal. This is a big part of my life. 7.5 years with these fine folks, Mr. Ace Lundon, and talking to the universe through the internet in the early days of podcasting. I hope you all enjoy what's coming up here in the next few minutes. Thank you for your time. Okay, howdy, my name is Mike Merlin Means, and this is Merlin Public Media, and tonight we have a conversation with 5 of us who have a legacy of working with the great Mr. Ace Lundon on his various podcast projects. Gentlemen, please introduce yourselves.
I'll go first. I'm Lance Helms, coming to you live from Decatur, Georgia.
Hi, I'm Phil Reese, and I'm coming live from Washington, D.C.
I'm Sean Chandler, and I am coming to you live from New York City.
And I'm Donnie Winter, and I'm coming to you live from Midland, Michigan.
Well, at least you got one West Coaster still. Okay, guys, we were all part of this major project. My recollection is the whole thing lasted about 7.5 years, and it started with Ace and Lance on the microphones and me in the background. So, Lance, open us up. Talk to me.
So my recollection is that we got started about 2007, 2008, as I recall, and did it for about 4 years, and my involvement ended, I think, in about 2012. And I was thinking as we were getting ready for this, that's been 10 years ago, which kind of blows my mind. But the thing that's just so Ace about the whole thing is he just started stalking me. We were on a listserv together. I mean, this was the early 2000s when people were in Yahoo groups and Google groups and all that stuff. And he would, and I was a little bit of a poster, maybe an over poster, and he would just react. And he started direct chatting me, and then that turned into, this is very Ace. It was, I'm really old school. I believe in talking on the phone. We need to talk on the phone. And that was a time in my life when I would take pretty long drives. I was running all over the state of Georgia doing volunteer work, and it's a big state. And I'd say, well, I've got a big drive ahead of me. So, let's talk on Saturday. I'll give you a buzz. And the dude just worked his way into my life and into my head. And I don't know, actually, I do know how it all got started. Mike, he mentioned to me that he had a talk show on that local radio station, probably in Bullhead City.
Actually, it's in Needles, California. It was called KTOX.
That's exactly right. Needles, California. And I want to say it started right after he moved there. So he had decided he was going to relocate to that area, got this show going. You were the producer, as I recall.
Nope.
You were involved?
Nope. Here's what happened. I had met Ace, and I can't tell you how. But he's calling me one day, and he says, I'm doing a talk show on KTOX. And I'm like, okay. He goes, I can't bite my tongue. They're getting FCC warnings every time I do a show. What can we do? And I said, well, I heard about these things called podcasts. He's like, can we do one? I'm like, I'm pretty sure. and I started researching. The original rig was 2 laptops, a mixer, a microphone, and a bunch of other stuff. And today, everything is done on 1 laptop. Okay, pick it up.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, because I remember him mentioning that he was basically getting kicked off the air. I've either forgotten or didn't have the part about the FCC warnings, but that would be our guy Ace. And he said, this guy Mike, he's like, you should really get into podcasting. And he said, Lance, I don't know what that is. And I said, well, I think I know what it is. I have no experience, but and I described it to him. I was like, you're just recording sound files. People can download them. There's this thing called the iPod. Interesting with the news that just came out, and a lot of people are using that to listen. This was not pre-iPhone, but back when the iPhone was still pretty darn new and not universal. So yeah, it was definitely podcasting. And I did the thing that I always do. I said, Ace, he said, well, I don't know if I can do it alone. And I said, well, I mean, if you need a wingman, I'll jump in there with you. And almost as soon as I said it, I was like, what have I gotten myself into? But the rest is history. And it was, I think, pretty much once a week, every Wednesday night for about 4 years.
Do you remember how long the first shows were?
They were, I think, 2 hours.
They were 2 hours.
Yeah, because his attitude was, you do it for the same length as the radio talk show. And, radio talk shows can go on. I mean, 2 hours is nothing.
No.
And I tried to tell him, I was like, well, Ace, people record podcasts that are snippets. I mean, they'll do like a 2-minute inspiration. They'll do a 15-minute thing or a half hour. It doesn't have to be 2 hours. And he was like, well, I think to do it right, we have to do the full 2 hours. So I was like, all right, it's your show, man. That's what we did.
Who came in next?
That would be me. Oh,
Hi, I'm Sean. No, I'm sorry, Phil. I apologize. I stepped on your thing.
That's okay.
That's so like me. Sorry, I'll dilate.
It is.
Mm-hmm. That's okay. Hi, I am Phil. Yes, I think I came on in either 2008 or early 2009. The show was already going, but I came in. So I met Ace through when I was in undergrad. He visited Central Michigan University.
Yeah.
And that's where I was going. The GSA brought him. I was no longer in GSA leadership at the time, but they brought him, and I met him that way. And we Facebook friended each other, and we were chatting on Facebook, much like Lance, getting into queer history and queer politics. And I left undergrad, started teaching. And I didn't stay a teacher for long. It was not for me, but I decided to go to grad school. And around the time that I was deciding to go to grad school, I was also blogging a lot on queer politics. And Ace invited me on the show with Lance and he to do an interview once. And that was fun. I had a really good time. And then he asked me a couple of weeks later to come back again. And so I came back again. We could, talked about more stuff. And then right after that one, he said, why don't you just join us every week? Lance is my co-host, but you can be our Coco. And so that was my nickname on the show. When Ace was ready for me to chime in, he would say, Coco, what do you have to say about that?
That is so true.
And I did that. It was the three of us until I started Same Sex Sunday with Joe Mirabella. And I juggled it for a couple of weeks, I think, maybe a month or two, both shows. But it was too stressful for me to dedicate 2 nights a week to recording podcasts and working and going to grad school. So I had to leave Lundon Calling. But it was a really fun experience. And I'm so glad that you're getting them back out there and that we can all go revisit the old back catalog. There's some gems in there.
So true. Phil, listening to you talk, it's like Ace was sliding into people's DMs before it was even a thing. That was
Yeah.
that man.
That's
true, how he rolled.
But he wasn't. The funny thing is that he wasn't like doing it for creepy reasons. He was just he was just making connections with people.
He was an old school entertainment industry guy, right? And it's like, he was acting like a producer. It's like, I'm going to make a connection. I'm going to pull you in. I'm going to work you into the show. And before you know it, like, you're my co-co and now you're my co.
Yeah.
That's his jam.
Okay. And from Phil, we went to.
Is it my turn?
It is your turn.
It's your turn, Sean.
I think now it might be your turn.
You guys are still great.
I thought that was like my echo when I said, well, and then Phil, you said the exact same thing. And I go, okay, Mike, we're echoing. Anyways, I came on as a guest co-host. I don't want to call myself Coco because I've already confused myself with Phil already. And I don't want to double insult Phil like that.
Gentlemen, can I ask Sean and Lance, can you please get your video?
Sure. Bye.
Give me a little better bandwidth for recording.
Okay. All right. We cool?
We're good.
All right, cool. And sorry, I'm GU. I'm guest now. But I heard about Ace from my friend Sambarelli, who is like I just want to say that he's like the honorary mayor of West Hollywood. Or at least he was when I lived there or when I was in California. And he was filling in, I think, Lance, for you because you got super, super busy. And then one week he couldn't do the show. So Sam recommended me to Ace. And then Ace, I got the 2-hour phone call as well. Lance, I swear, I hate talking on the phone, but with Ace, I would talk for like 2 hours, and he was like super, super charming. So I filled in a couple of times, and then he wanted to change the show up a little bit. Lance, I think when you had decided that it was time for you to wave goodbye for whatever reason, but he wanted to do a show that somebody would interview him regarding his autobiography, The Closets Are Empty, The Dining Room's Full. So I agreed to it, and I think for like something like 150 or 60 shows, we went through his autobiography and just picked it apart, like piece by piece. Wasn't it like about 160, 50, 60 shows?
I could look it up right now, but I'm not going to risk losing Skype. But it was a lot because there were, each chapter was 2 or 3, sometimes 4 episodes, and you just picked his brain to no end, and it was beautiful.
How long did that take to do all those episodes?
I think those were 1 hour.
Yeah, it was like
was it a couple of years?
Yeah.
Oh, give me just a second. Let me see if I can find them.
Well, I think, okay, so when did Lundon Calling itself transition over from when you did it? When did you end your stint on it?
I think it was 2012. That's my recollection.
So I think it was it had to have been about 3 years or so, because 2015 is when we started the London Bridge show.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah, it had to be about 3 years because we did our very best to stay on a weekly schedule and take holidays off and whatnot. But when we finally finished, we decided to go back. He wanted to go back to the standard Lundon Calling Show and have guests on. And then at that point, we made a decision that we wanted to do a different type of show. And we felt that because of the fact that Ace was an older senior gay gentleman, and I was a middle-aged gay gentleman back then at that time. And then we needed somebody really fabulous to come on and fill in, which brings us to
Hello,
take it
me.
away.
So, what an entrance! Thank you, Sean. I appreciate
That was
that.
perfect.
You're welcome.
So I first met Ace as well when he came to CMU, those many years ago, and I had always heard so much about Ace at that time, and and being able to have that exposure was just wholesome and phenomenal. But over the years, he really strived to stay in touch with me. I know when social media became like a huge thing, I was literally in the throes of coming out, and it was kind of a really troubling experience for me. And around like 2007 or 2008 is when Ace started having very long conversations with me. So we would talk on Yahoo Messenger, I think, and then we would talk on the phone. I'm not much of a phone conversationalist either, but Ace just had that way about him where like he kind of like the wisdom drew you in, and that really kind of drew me in at that time. So as I was going through my undergrad at CMU, that's when he informed me that he was doing Lundon Calling. And I think toward like the latter half of Lundon Calling, I appeared as a guest for probably a few episodes. I think it was probably like maybe half a dozen episodes, just as like a guest conversationalist / perspective. And then it wasn't until 2015, of course, still staying in touch, where he reached out to me while I was in grad school and wanted to know if I wanted to be the third co-host on the London Bridge Show. And I, of course, eagerly agreed. I was like, yes, please. So that's the Cliff Notes version of my history with Ace.
You were the second.
And I was through it all.
You sure were.
And actually, if I remember right, I don't know who was co-hosting, but I actually was on the show for a couple of episodes, and that shows you how Ace can coerce a person, because up until recently, you never heard my voice on a microphone. But yeah, he got me in on a couple of shows, and I was like an absolute total wreck.
I'm fairly sure it was one of the London Bridge shows. I think that you were on.
A lot of that is all kind of blurred. I mean, it was just one big massive event, except for January's. You guys remember we always took January's off?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Do you remember why?
You had something going on.
I did a 4-week jewelry show. Took out my silversmithing work every January. So yeah, we had January off and picked it up again with the new season.
It was always a nice break, just kind of clear the mind and, bring in the new year. It was just, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And I think we extended it into the holidays. So remember, we would always take a couple of weeks over Christmas and New Year's as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is nice. Because, I like to travel during that time, and it seemed to work out really well.
It was such a memorable part of my personal history. Let's do something really kind of strange here. Let's go back through the group here and give me your fondest Ace memory.
My fondest Ace memory is I can still hear him in his voice saying his Ace-isms. We are who we have been becoming. I still say a lot of those things to this day.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because, of course, now they're all running out of my head. Oh, my favorite. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it.
My favorite, too.
Yep.
Great one.
And then I found that other one. There's so much good in the worst of us and so much bad in the best of us that it behooves us all not to talk about the rest of us. Again, like he was such an old school talent that, he ran the show like a radio show where out of his head, he had all these lines and he could repeat them. And I just don't have that gift. And I remember not really being that guy on the show. And I don't know if that's just the way we are now, but I think he comes from a time when you memorized your lines, and as a host, like you had your acisms, and you could rattle them off. And man, he was amazing at it. The way he did the intro, the way he rattled those off. And looking back, this is just an oddity about me listening to you guys talk about the archive and the old shows. I don't know what it is about me, but I can't look backwards. I don't even like looking at old pictures. It's kind of why I don't do social media very well. And I don't know that I would ever be able to listen to the old shows because I'm just painfully aware of everything I would have done differently. and when I think about that time, I just think, he was so patient, and he took somebody who was completely green, had no idea what he was doing, except that he wanted to help. And he allowed me to just go along for this ride. And, I made all kinds of mistakes, and he never said a critical word. And if you really think about that, it's like, here's a guy who was an entertainer for his entire career and worked with all kinds of personalities and all the pressures that go with being a live entertainer. And, he was a stage performer and radio and just all of it. And he never had, I don't recall ever receiving any criticism from him, constructive or otherwise. Maybe I have, a glossy memory because it's been so long, but we just kind of did our thing. And as I recall it now, it was like he just reveled in whatever unfolded, which I think is, maybe part of the charm of a live medium, even though it wasn't really a live medium, but he treated it that way.
Yeah, he really enjoyed the process, I think.
Yep.
And that was really the key to him, is just being present in the process. And that's something I always I think I took it for granted, but I think I've taken a little of that of Ace into my adulthood as I've gotten older.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think about those times every time I listen to anybody interview anybody now, because it was through doing that show that I realized, because I had no formal training, of course, and I hadn't even really thought about what does it take to interview people. And I just skinned my knees so many times. And now when I listen to anybody like Terry Gross or whatever, I take note of the things that they do that make an interview feel effortless. And that's why I'm always so grateful, because Ace just allowed me to sort of like bumble through. I mean, we got some pretty good folks. Like, I remember I just felt like I completely screwed up Sally Kellerman. Like, I just did not know. And I'll always regret that, because of course, I mean, I had known about her since I was a kid, like even before, she kind of came back into pop culture at the time we interviewed her, because she was on that TV show. I can't remember the name of it. But I had known her since the 70s and the 80s when I was, really, really small. And I was so looking forward to interviewing her, and then screwed it all up. But I think what made up for it in my mind was Catherine Bach. That interview just was effortless. She was so cool, and she told such a great story. And I was just, I think, in a good zone and was able to just let it flow. And the gold coin that I remember from that interview is her whole story of how she actually almost didn't go to that audition for Dukes of Hazzard. Mm-hmm. And I forget who it was that convinced her to go. I think it was somebody else pretty famous, or maybe it was just her agent. But in the industry, you're auditioning all the time at certain levels, and I think she was in that phase, and she knew the audition was coming up, and she was telling a friend, "I'm just not going to go." She hadn't dressed for it. She hadn't really thought about it. Certainly wasn't prepared. And her friend was like, "You have to go. Like, you can't miss an audition. I mean, it could be the one." And the rest is history. Daisy Duke. That was her sort of life career defining role.
Okay, Phil.
I love the
give
fact
Phil a chance here.
So cool as an interview. She was such a cool person, just so approachable. What were you saying, Mike?
Let's give Phil a shot here. His best memory.
Oh, okay. Well, that was great. And the way you felt about that interview, Lance, is how I felt about when we interviewed Greta Kammermeyer. I felt I did so poorly in that I think she even made a comment in the interview about something I said that, clearly she was not having me. But Ace never yelled at me or scolded me for pissing off Greta Kammermeyer. And I was back the next week. I think some of my favorite moments, I loved the tea that when Ace told us and we found out that he had hooked up with Jim Neighbors. That was hot.
Oh my God. I'm so jealous.
That was fun. And how Ace said, and he left his plaid shirt or whatever behind, and I would smell it for days afterwards, just to smell.
Wait, he hooked up with them?
Yeah, he hooked up with his neighbors.
Oh my
God!
I thought he just meant you guys interviewed him.
No.
Wow. Oh wow.
Back in the 70s or something, maybe the 80s, he hooked up with Jim Neighbors. And
oh my God.
Jim Neighbors apparently left his shirt behind or something, and Ace kept it around and sniffed it. And that was a cute little detail. And so that was Ace was just so honest. It was great. I do remember from the podcast, my memory is the episode that we did on the anniversary of his partner's passing. That was extremely emotional. Patrick's passing. That was an extremely emotional episode. It was the only time I ever heard Ace cry and sob, and it was extremely emotional, and it was very raw and graphic. Ace never pulled a punch, so he told us
not a one.
But it was also really sweet. It was very human. It was a wonderful interview. But I think my favorite memory of Ace has nothing to do with a podcast taping. It was when when the National Equality March of 2010 was announced, a lot of the queer bloggers and stuff were just deriding it and just making fun of it, the Cleve Jones March in 2010. And one day they released the names of all the sponsors and co-hosts of the 2010 March. And I was getting ready to do a post for Bellerico about how silly this list of names of people sponsoring the march was. And I started reading the list of names, and I was going to say something snotty about everyone on the list. And I get to my name on the list, and Lance's name on the list, and Ace's name on the list. Ace had put us in as co-sponsors for the National Equality March. And I called Ace, and I'm like, how dare you put my name in? And we talked about it for an hour. And by the end of the conversation, I was so full-throated in favor of the National Equality March. I ended up being one of the official media people for the National Equality March. Ace totally sold me on it. And the post I ended up writing for Bellerico wasn't snotty at all. It was about my change of heart on it that Ace had brought me to. That talking to me, he had opened up my heart. And it ended up being a huge deal in my life, a really pivotal moment for me, all because Ace just, kind of couldn't, just sort of, he was kind of a bull in a china shop sometimes, just sort of plowed ahead, but he was right. He was right. And I am so grateful to him for that.
Ace was the skinniest bull you would ever see in a china shop. But a bull nonetheless. Oh my gosh.
Okay, Sean, I think it's your turn.
Mike, Lance, Coco, are you going to make me say it?
Yes.
Oh, wait.
That's amazing.
Sorry, Donnie, if you didn't catch that reference.
No, I did. I remember.
Okay,
that.
good. Okay, one of the coolest things that Ace ever did for me was my husband and I wrote a play, and it was called The Flash, and we were doing a version of it in Los Angeles with the Celebration Theater. And so I went and picked Ace up one weekend. I went from LA to Bullhead City, got him, brought him back so he could see the play. But he arranged for us to have lunch with Patricia Nell Warren of The Front Runner. And it was, I mean,
fantastic.
I was a spaz. I geeked out. I was like, I'm sorry. I can't. It was pretty. It was sad watching me behave during that lunch, but it was just so wonderful to be able to meet her. I mean, what a great writer, and just like a regular down to earth person. And it was amazing. I told her, I remember like sneaking into like used bookstores, and I found her book and was like hiding it. And I'd go in after school and just read a little bit of it. And anyways, it was really cool. But one of the things that I loved the most about Ace is his irreverence. I mean, he reminded me so much of my grandmother, because my grandmother, you know, she passed as well, but she was in her 80s. She would say whatever she wanted. She did not give a shit. And I love that about Ace, that I mean, I don't know if you remember, Donnie, but there'd be some shows where you and I would be like, oh my God, like you could just hear our jaws hitting the ground with some of the stuff he would say.
Very frequently, and I loved it.
We're not really
because then we would be like the dissenting voices, and he'd be like, oh, okay.
yeah we'd be like, well, I don't know if we necessarily believe that. And you know, and I was thinking about it today as I was sort of like remembering Ace, and I just thought, you know, I don't know how hot he'd be on how PC we are now, and you know, so much of the thought police going on, and
oh, he would hate it.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Wouldn't he though?
Oh yeah,
he would hate it. And in fact, like you're so right. It's like I'm sitting here and there's things running through my head that I'm like, oh, I probably shouldn't say it on this show, but then we're not really doing it justice. For instance, if Ace hooked up with Jim Neighbors, then I think we all know who was the top, right? Because Ace was pretty clear about that, and that's something he would have said. He would have just said, and by the way, in case you were wondering,
Ace fucked Jim Neighbors, we know.
I mean, to be clear.
Oh.
The other thing that ran through my head when you were talking about Patricia Nell Warren is, you know, and I'm like doing this episode like stone cold sober, but y'all know that the whole time I was co-hosting, I was soaked in gin.
yeah.
And back in those days, I would have said, well, Ace, you know what was happening with Sean is he was star fucking, and Ace would have been like, what's that? And I would have had to explain it because he probably wouldn't have known the word. He would have been like, oh, you know what we used to call that? Okay, so that was blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, I've heard that word too, but now you have to say starfucker. That's the cool thing.
I was like star fucking with no lube. It was embarrassing. It really was. But yeah, I remember just thinking, good God, some of the things that he would say, and honestly, he would say the exact same things in this day and age. He had his own point of view, and it was based on his experiences, and he was comfortable with it, and he made no apologies. And I thought that was really, really cool.
That's one of the things that made the show what it was.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's not enough of that now. And you know what? The people that people think, okay, I'm just going to get political, because we can't be bi-coastal, bisexual, and bipartisan if we don't do a little bit of politics. But
oh, definitely.
You know, it would have been, oh gosh, I'm kind of glad he's not around to see all this Tucker Carlson thing, because speaking of genuineness, right? Look at all the people who think they're taking in something that's genuine, and it's actually completely entertainment, and they're being exploited. And it's like Ace, at least was pure in his convictions and said exactly what was on his mind, and it was not for entertainment value. It was just, that was his gift, right? Was like, my show is just me being me.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It is not scripted.
No.
Well, wasn't that part of one of the intros at one time, unscripted?
Unscripted. It's good stuff.
I don't know. I remember something about a line he did that had unscripted in it in the opening of one of the shows. That, and of course, potty mouth.
Yes, and I'm a notorious potty mouth, he would say.
That's right.
I would love the fact that we would be able to have like a very sophisticated intellectual conversation, and then suddenly it would like turn into like sexual innuendo comments that were super hilarious. And I, like, little gay me, like, I was just like, oh, what? And now I'm like, oh, that's me now. Okay.
That was his charm, is that he could do that, but it was never offensive. It was never. It was completely inappropriate in the most appropriate way. You know,
It was enduring.
Well-turned
Yeah.
phrase.
Very, very endearing, and you never were like, "Oh, Ace, you crossed the line." It didn't matter what you were talking about if he, jumped in with something gross. Like he still had a way of delivering it that was charming, and you could and very forgivable, and really wonderful.
Simultaneously completely not innocent, but sounding innocent. That's a gift.
Yeah. Wholesome, even when talking about holes.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's the Swedish in him, it's that, like, oh gosh. He was an iconoclast. One of the definitions of an iconoclast is someone who destroys images used in religious worship. That would be Ace. What's this statue, Crash? Oh, well, I didn't know what that was anyway. I'm just going to be me.
I used to love it when he would, like, one of my favorite sayings that he used to say was, "I didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of." And I thought, oh my God, that had to be from, like,
that's old school.
I mean, like, that's way old school, right?
I remember my grandma used to
back,
say that.
That's Depression era.
Right.
Oh yeah, I heard that one growing up. That's
hilarious.
a gem.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I think my
Bonnie,
fondest
your turn,
memory.
man.
Oh, thank you. I think my fondest memory was it was, I don't know. I was having a conversation with him on Yahoo Messenger once. Yeah, this doesn't have anything to do with the show. I had a conversation with him about, like, love interests, and I don't know. I was dating somebody at the time, some fling who probably devastated my romantic little heart or something. And he would kind of, like, take me under his wing. And he made a comment once basically saying, well, if this person's member wasn't up to par, then it wasn't worth it anyway. And I remember I remember I had, like, been so depressed because, this person I was with for 5 days destroyed me, right? But I remember dying of laughter over this comment. And it just, yeah, like, I think that one comment also helped me come out of my prudishness, because I was, like, very much a prude person. and now I attribute my sense of humor to that. So that's my fondest memory.
And if there's one thing that Ace wanted for everyone, it's good dick.
Exactly, right? and if I were to share something poignant to balance it out, of course, when I was coming out, he would frequently tell me, "You are who you've been becoming," and that really stayed with me throughout the years. And I know that was very much present even in the shows, and it's something that I often reflect on, and it's something that I, in my profession as a teacher, like, I will pass that down to students as well if they need to hear it. So, like, it's just one of those, like, seeds that he planted a long time ago that I really value.
Right on.
Yeah, I for some reason I don't. Donnie, it feels like you've sort of almost changed the most because of Ace, because of him, like, I don't want to say getting to you, but getting to know you earlier on. I think maybe when you were a little more malleable. Would you say that? I mean,
I would agree with that because I mean, when I was at CMU, like, and when I went through my coming out experience, like, I didn't really have a huge support network, and Ace often was the person that I would look to as an example of like, oh my gosh, here is this functional LGBTQ plus person that I can look to and maybe find myself being 5% of that level of functional someday. And I did get a lot of support through GSA at a certain point after, after all of the fact, but I really felt like that Ace kind of served as that sounding board. He was able to kind of like cut through like the hormonal late teenager emotions that I would have about like relationships and everything. So I don't know. I really feel like I gained a lot of objectivity from all of our conversations. So yeah, I would say that I changed a lot due to our conversations.
He groomed you.
Oh no!
wow.
Oh man.
Now,
I mean,
I didn't say that.
I was technically 18, so was it?
Oh, you could groom anyone of any age.
That's true. This is true.
That's
But I
exactly
don't
right.
think I don't think that's what was happening at all.
Oh, I'm
No.
being silly. Again,
he
I'm
would have
doing what I
laughed
used
at
to
that.
do, but this time sober.
Right.
Um,
And Lance, who had the biggest influence on you based on that comment? See, he would say something like that, and as a joke, and we would laugh at it. And that's not something that you could really like say. Like we wince when we hear that or say it ourselves. Well, I do, but Ace, nah, you didn't care.
No.
Exactly. Yeah.
You didn't,
Exactly.
You didn't give a shit.
The things he would say, if they were coming out of any other mouth, it would have
Right.
been over. But Ace, like it wasn't. It was so harmless coming from Ace, and just so like I said earlier, charming and endearing. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I can tell you what would have happened if he were on this and he heard me say the thing about grooming. He'd go, "Well, wait, describe. What do you mean?" I'd be like, "Well,
What do you mean? What's
people
grooming?
now are saying that we're grooming, we're grooming trans kids and da 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 da." And he'd go, "Well, I mean, I groomed Patrick. He was so young." And I'd be like, "Oh my God, Ace, we have to destroy this episode.
Right.
You can't say that." And he'd be like, "Well, it's true."
Right.
No, we never pulled an episode. We never censored a word ever. It
Never.
was straight out of the mics and onto the deck.
That's right.
Wow.
Cut and
My favorite Ace memory actually took place in my backyard. Ace and I had talked about, him and the farm when he was young and the chickens, and we had 3 chickens in our backyard. And one day he came over to visit, and we're out in the backyard talking. He's sitting on a chair, and the next thing you know, there's a chicken on his shoulder, there's a chicken at his feet, and there's a chicken on his lap, and he was just in heaven.
Oh.
Like a Saint Francis of poultry.
Yeah, yeah. And that I have a picture of it somewhere. I'm going to have to find it. But
That's
yeah,
amazing.
that's my favorite memory of Ace was in my backyard. I was, I was blessed in being, 10 minutes from his house,
Mhm.
and lots of private off-the-air conversations about all kinds of stuff. And surprise, he did use some notes. He did, really. I've seen them. But yeah.
Well, I exaggerate. He prepared quite a bit for the shows, more than I ever did.
There were pages all over that desk, and a lot of it was still just free form.
Yeah. Over
He
prepared.
had a great-
That's the way.
Totally. He had a way of that at least I learned where to put together some sort of an outline, but don't be afraid to divert from the outline. Don't be afraid to elaborate on certain things, and that helped me so much with my current podcast. I remember the first episode, Mike. You probably remember this. I wrote down like 20 different questions about the first 10 pages of his book. I asked him, he answered them, and 10 minutes later, like the podcast it could have been over if not for him just, coming in and vamping and like making it longer. And yeah, he had some conversations with me where he would critique me, and I was appreciated. He was never mean. He was just always like, hey, have you ever heard of like extemporaneous speaking and things like that? Anyways, I love that chicken story. That's great.
Yeah, that was cool. I got to go find that picture. It's got to go up when I start put this up and start sharing the episodes with everybody.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, anything I wanted to ask is done. So roundtable it, gentlemen. Talk about what you want to. Just don't step on each other's toes too awfully much.
Okay.
I just feel like we were so ahead of our time.
We really were. Nobody knew what a podcast was when I joined as a Coco. I had to explain what a podcast was to so many people and show them how to subscribe to it, which at that time you could really only subscribe in iTunes and some readers, right? There weren't like podcasting apps like we have now.
Yeah, I mean, we posted the shows on the website, and I know people listened on the website. That was that long ago.
Yep.
Listened and downloaded. Yep.
We really were. I thought about that when back in 2015 when Serial came out, and all of a sudden podcasts were the rage, and everyone was talking about podcasts. I was like, I've had podcasts. I've been podcasting. You people are just discovering it now. It's just really, he was, and I think it's great, Lance, that he didn't even really know what a podcast it was. As soon as you told him about it, he was like, great, sounds good, let's do it. That's very Ace.
Yeah. I only have one regret from the whole time, besides just all the little things that I would have said or not said, but that's just me being my own worst critic. But for the show and for us, I know that Ace tried so hard to get Cloris Leachman to do a show with us.
Oh, yes,
and I remember, I'm pretty sure that we were talking to her agent, and her agent was very focused on like, well, how big is your audience? And I think because of that, it was just not going to happen. And I wish we could have pulled it off for a million reasons, because, she's Cloris Leachman, and she sort of came back into the public eye, after the podcast. And of course, now we don't have her. And boy, I wish we could have recorded an interview with her.
Agreed.
Yeah. I'm really one thing that really makes me sad is the fact that we lost Ace in the middle of doing London Bridge. Like, I really felt that we had so much more ground to cover with that show. Yeah. And because of the conversation, I think we only did probably 19 or 20 episodes, Mike.
It was pretty short.
Yeah, and I just remember all the ideas we had, and we could have done so much more. I'm glad that we were able to do what we did. But again, any opportunity to have conversation with him was very meaningful.
Totally
agreed.
I think the biggest thing that Ace taught me was to embrace the flaws that would occur during the show. And that has helped me so much with the podcast I have. Oh, did I mention I have a podcast now? And podcast. That was for you, Coco. I remember I would feel so kind of silly or dumb or embarrassed or ashamed when I would screw up on the show. And what Ace taught me was that's the human connection. That's what people are responding to. When they hear you do that, they they relax a little bit and they say, okay, this person is a human being and they make mistakes, and also how to sort of like laugh it off and recover from it. And where I thought that was working against me, Ace taught me that as actually works for me as a host. And that is something that I mean, that's like the biggest piece of podcast advice I give to people if they're ever interested in getting my opinion on it.
I can really relate with that. I do podcasting now as well. And like, I think that the biggest thing I learned from Ace is I learned how to facilitate a conversation. Because early on when I was guesting on the Lundon Calling Show, like I literally didn't know what I was doing. Like I was just like, yeah, I agree. Sure. and like gradual practice and listening to you guys, like I really felt like I started developing my own capabilities. And I think I even attribute my ability to teach people back to those podcasts, because learning how to facilitate a conversation is so important across many different applications, you know?
Yeah, I think Ace really set a lot of us up on a trajectory that our lives would not have been on. I was already blogging at the time, but like I wasn't doing much other than that. I think Ace bringing me into the podcast really set me up for the next few stages of my life. I ended up having my own podcast, and then I actually became a journalist for a while. I was the web editor at the Washington Blade, and I don't know if that stuff would have happened without Ace, you know. And so I'm really grateful that he saw something in me that I never considered being part of a podcast before Ace invited me to be Coco, and then it became a defining part of who I was.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I believe that's what's called a legacy.
Yeah. I think it's too. And now I also have a podcast that I haven't updated in over a year.
I mean, what are you doing with your life?
I am sad that Ace wasn't around for me getting sober and entering recovery, because I really would love to, now that I am in recovery and sober, to go back and have some conversations with Ace.
Yeah.
Actually becoming an adult for the first time. And
how long have you been sober?
So that it'll be 3 years this month. And one of the
congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
And one of the first things I did when I got sober was start a podcast. And I have not updated it in about a year since mid-pandemic. But it was, one of my first instinct was, I feel like I'm going on this human journey. I'm going to share it with the world. And that's kind of, what Ace did. Like, let's share this journey together.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really cool. I mean, look, there's a lot of podcasts that are like, limited series, right? It's like you take on a topic, and if you worked through that topic and felt like you put a big bow on it, good job. There's so many shows now, right, that come on that I watched the first season and I'm like, they could stop here and I would think this was a great show. And then, 4 seasons in, like, I'll just say it.
Oh,
like,
what
the
are they doing?
season of Ozark, I'm like, I don't care about any of these characters. I don't really care what happens to them anymore. I can't figure out who I'm supposed to be focused on. Like, who am I identifying with here? They're all so awful. And it's like, I should have stopped after season 3. You had me at that.
For me, it's OA.
Oh, yeah, same diff. I'm like, first season, I'm like, I get it. That functions as a complete story. I don't ever have to go back to it. But, that's not how entertainment works, unfortunately.
Yeah.
By and large. So kudos to you, Phil. I mean, if you were done, you were done.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not putting it to bed yet. I'm not taking it off the internet yet.
Yeah,
The
it's just
interwebs.
great about the
Interwebs, yep.
Remember when you used to say that? It was funny.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike, I think you picked that up too. Yeah, the interwebs and
Oh yeah.
I got the opportunity to do a series for Lundon Calling, and that was great training for me because the podcast I have now is a theater podcast, and I've done a couple of series, and the last series that I did was called Act Two Places, and it was all about the people in the theater business here in New York and throughout the world, and how they reacted to the pandemic and how they set themselves up to go back into restarting things. And and if it wasn't for Ace like giving me the opportunity to try my hand at this and build up on it, I don't think it would be as popular as it is. I mean, it's not super popular, but it's popular enough. And I'm really grateful to him for doing that. Again, I think he gave a lot of us chances that I don't know if anybody else, at least let me speak for myself. And once again, not speak for poor Phil as I railroad over it. Sorry. Anyway, Phil, I feel so bad. I really do.
No
I feel
worries.
like I should be Co. And
There's enough toast
I mean,
to go around.
right. And I think that he, for at least for me, I don't think I can't see anybody ever being so gracious and kind and generous with their time and their knowledge and their humor, giving me this kind of an opportunity. I don't know if that's the way you guys feel, but for me, I felt that he was such a blessing in my life.
Absolutely.
I feel the same way. Like just being one of the first people to believe in me when I didn't believe in myself, that did a lot. So I really resonate with that.
Well, it's life-changing.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
It's absolutely life-changing.
Right. And why did it take this conversation for me to realize that? Wow. I'm going to pull my head out of the sand sometimes, you guys.
Well,
then there's a purpose to this.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we knew it subliminally, but like it feels completely different verbalizing it,
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, like, this is honestly, one of the first significant conversations we've had in years. So, like, I think that just has the tendency of reminding us of things, that we probably knew before, but we forgot about.
Well, I've been going over the audio of the old shows, and it's kind of embarrassing. I'm spending countless hours cleaning up the audio on those old shows. Just my skill set has come a ways since then, and some of that stuff was rough. And again, I hadn't done a podcast. I mean, and figured out how to run all the tech and learning all of that, and that pushed me forward in all of my audio work for my video and live sound mixing and theater mixing, and it just pushed me forward. So I've had a big learning experience here getting into this. I mean, if you guys had ever seen the studio when I was first recording, I mean, there were just wires everywhere. It was ugly, but it worked.
You guys, this Lundon Calling and London Bridge, that was our groundlings. That was our Upright Citizens Brigade. Like I just listened to the Smartless episode where they interviewed John Mulaney, and of course they all talk, kibitz about how, where they got started. Oh, and were you in that troop? And oh yeah, I remember when it was under Gristides, and I'm just listening and reflecting, and I'm like, that's what this is, right? It's like we did this thing. We had no credentials practically to bring to the table, except somebody was like, let's do this.
Yep.
We skinned our knees, had amazing experiences, learned a ton of things, and have each one of us we regard ourselves as better version. We are now who we were becoming 10 years ago and 5 years ago and 7 years ago. We are now better, improved versions of ourselves, in our humble opinions, based on all of the bruises that we picked up. Because Mike, listening to you talk, I'm like, that's exactly how I feel about my interviewing skills back then. So we're all in the same boat. So we can move on and say, okay, that was our groundlings. I don't know of a better word for it.
I think that's perfect.
Second City, right? Like all those places where the big comedy stars get started, right? And then they look back on SNL, right? And they're like, oh, well, I was listening. Oh, same. Sorry, another Smartless reference. But then they interview Mike Myers, right? And he's who he is now, and he's looking back on SNL the same way, and he's like, oh yeah, back then. So who knows what's in front of us?
Wow. Well,
this has been a wonderful time. I can't tell you guys how much I appreciate you guys getting together for this and letting me talk with you and go back over memories and what we're doing now and moving forward. And just ever since I found the stash of recordings buried in a hard drive, buried in a box, I've wanted to do this. And, I'm like, is anybody else going to want to do this with me? People moved on to a point where this is in the past and needs to stay there. And it's not. And we're all here and we're all talking. And this has just been another amazing experience for me right here tonight.
Likewise, I feel the same.
Agreed.
Same.
And you see, I have absolutely no class when I do interviews. I just open a can of worms and let people talk.
Thank you for
kind of what it is.
Together, Mike. Thank you for putting this together.
Yeah,
it's been great.
Totally.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Really good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I will send you all links to where this can be seen and heard. And I, for one, right now, I'm going to get away from here, get my oxygen strapped on my face, and unfog my head.
Right on, man.
Feel better.
Well, all
Good
of
to
you
hear your
take
voice.
care.
Yes.
Good night,
too.
y'all.
Thank you, John.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Go well into that good night, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Appreciate you all. Good night.
Good night.